My brother pushed me to the floor and beat me through the house my father left me. My brother said, "Sign or I will break all your bones." I was hit in the shoulder. I flew away, tripped over the carpet my grandmother had given us 20 years earlier, and sprawled on the living room floor. "Sign it, Lizzie!" Garrett loomed over me, his face, so similar to his father's, twisted with rage. I barely recognized my brother. "Just sign that you're giving up the house and I'll leave." I tried to stand up, leaning on my elbow, but Garrett put his foot on my arm. Not hard, but enough to let me know he wasn't joking. "Dad wanted me to keep the house." My voice was shaking, but I tried to speak firmly. Garrett leaned in, his eyes narrowed. He smelled of whiskey. 10 in the morning. Jesus! You manipulated him. Always been a daddy's girl. Always knew how to get what you wanted. "Sign it, or I'll break every bone in your body." He swung, and I instinctively covered my face with my hands, expecting a blow. Instead, I heard the sound of the door opening. Garrett froze. "Lizzie!" Paige's voice sounded like a rescue. "What the hell is going on?" Garrett stepped back, clutching the papers he'd just tried to get me to sign. "This is a family matter," he growled. "She's stealing what's rightfully mine." Paige, all 5 feet tall, straightened up, clutching her bulky bag, as if she were about to throw it at Garrett. "Family business, really? Are the bruises on her arms a family affair too?" I hadn't noticed them when they appeared. The finger-shaped bruises, where Garrett had grabbed me when I tried to run to the kitchen. My brother picked up the papers that had fallen out of the fight and started for the door. "This isn't over, Lizzie. You think you can just take our house? We'll see what the court says." He nudged Paige's shoulder as he passed. "And your girlfriend won't always be around to protect you." The door slammed. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I felt my lungs burn. "Oh my God, Lizzie!" Paige rushed to my side, helping me to my feet. "We need to call the police." I shook my head, trying to control the shaking in my hands. "No, we don't. He attacked you." Paige gently touched my arm, where bruises were already showing. I wrapped my arms around my shoulders. My heart was still pounding, and my mind refused to believe that this had really happened. My own brother. In his entire life, Garrett had never laid a hand on me. Yes, he could be abrupt, selfish, but violence? "He's mad about the will," I tried to explain, although deep down I knew there was no way to justify what had happened. "Please explain to me what's going on." Paige led me to the kitchen, where Dad and I usually ate breakfast and talked. I instinctively looked at his seat, as if he might still be sitting there, with a newspaper and a cup of decaf coffee. My heart sank when I saw only an empty chair. Paige poured me some water, and I took a few sips, trying to collect my thoughts. Dad changed his will a year ago. I didn't even know about it until the lawyer read it last week. He left the house to me. All of it. Garrett got Dad's watch collection and some cash, but the house, Dad wanted it to be mine. I remembered Garrett's face in the lawyer's office. Shock, followed by indignation, then pure hatred. "You manipulated him," he screamed then. "You were always his favorite." And Garrett just snapped? Paige sat down across from me, clutching her cup. "He came by a few times after the funeral. At first, he was just yelling and accusing. Then he started threatening to sue. And today, he brought some papers, demanded that I give up the house." My eyes slid to the photo on the fridge. Me, my dad, and Garrett on his 35th birthday 3 years ago. We were all smiling. The last family holiday when everything seemed normal. "He was sure he was going to get the house," I continued quietly. "Mom always said that the eldest son should inherit the family home. It was a tradition in their family, but for the last 5 years, since she died, Garrett hardly ever visited. My dad was sick, his heart was weakening, and Garrett only came around when he needed money. I remembered the sleepless nights at my father's bedside when he was suffering from chest pains. I remembered how I took him to his treatments, how I cooked special meals, how I gave up my job in the capital to be there for him. Garrett lived 20 minutes away, but he hadn't found time to call for months. "You supported your father to the end." Paige said softly. I nodded, feeling the tears start to gather. 3 weeks later, I still couldn't believe that Dad was gone. Even at 32, I felt lost, like a child without him. He was gone so suddenly, I whispered. We were having breakfast, talking about painting the veranda. Then he grabbed his chest and just fell. I called an ambulance, tried to perform CPR, but it was too late. Paige took my hand. Garrett only came to the funeral, I continued, feeling anger boiling in my chest. He didn't even help with the arrangements. He's always been a selfish asshole, Paige said. But this is too much. You need to protect yourself, Lizzie. If he's capable of this, who knows what's going to happen next? I rubbed at the bruises on my arm. Paige had a point, but I just couldn't imagine filing a police report against my own brother. After all, this is Garrett, the one who took me for rides on his bike when I was 5, who taught me how to throw rocks across the water at the lake. I'll talk to a lawyer, I finally said. Maybe there's a way to, I don't know, work this out amicably. Paige looked at my bruises skeptically, but didn't argue. Okay, that's your decision. But you can't stay here alone while he's like this. You want to come to my place? I looked around. This house had been my home all my life. Every creak in the floor, every scratch on the walls, everything had a story. I felt safe here, with my dad. And now? Thanks, but I'll stay. This is my home. I'm not going to let Garrett throw me out. Paige sighed, but nodded. Then I'll stay with you for a few days. Don't argue. Now, we need to get some ice on that bruise. After Paige left to prepare the guest room, I returned to the living room. I could still feel my father's presence here. His armchair with worn-out armrests, the book he was reading with a bookmark on page 127, the faded photos on the walls. Our family had once been happy. I took an old album from the bottom shelf. The first pages were filled with photos of young parents with a newborn Garrett. Then there was me. In one picture, 4-year-old Garrett was holding me, a baby, in his arms, looking up at me with delight. The best big brother was written in my mom's hand. The tears finally found their way out, and I cried for the father I had lost, for the brother I never seemed to have truly known, for the family that was disintegrating before my eyes. When did it all go wrong? When did Garrett and I become so alien to each other that he could push me to the floor and threaten me? Was it just the house, or did something break down much earlier? I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just give up on my father's last will and testament. This house was his legacy, and if he decided to leave it to me, there was a reason, and I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I woke up to the smell of coffee and cinnamon biscuits. For a moment, it seemed that the last 3 weeks had been a nightmare. I would go down to the kitchen and find my dad in his blue bathrobe preparing our Sunday breakfast. But reality quickly returned when I spotted Paige in the doorway, tray in hand. "Thought you could use breakfast in bed," she said. "You didn't have to. At least today, let me take care of you." Paige put the tray down and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the bruises. They had darkened, turned purple. "I've been through worse." "What do you mean?" I sighed. "Once, when I was a kid, Garrett pushed me out of a tree, broke my arm in 2 places. Jesus, Lizzie, what are you, a family of psychopaths? He didn't mean to, it's just, we always had a competition. Who could climb higher? Who could run faster? I climbed his favorite tree, and he got mad." Suddenly, memories came flooding back. I was 8, Garrett was 14. It was a summer day, and I was on the top branch of the oak tree behind our house. "Get down!" Garrett shouts from below. "This is my spot." I laugh, and he starts to climb. He reaches me, his face twisted with anger. One push, and I fall, feel a sharp pain, scream. My mom, of course, forgave him in a minute. "He didn't mean to," she said at the hospital, stroking Garrett's head. "My boy is just too emotional. He got it from his grandfather, from my dad." I remember my father looking at her with some kind of incomprehensible expression. Then he took my hand, careful not to touch the cast. "You did well, you were brave." he told me. But please don't tease your brother anymore. It was our family pattern. Garrett would snap, my mom would defend him, and my dad would try to smooth things over. And me? I learned to be quiet, diligent, and never complain. But your mother saw those outbursts. Paige brought me back to reality. Marjorie Morton only saw what she wanted to see, I replied, sipping my coffee. For her, Garrett was a long-awaited son, an heir. She hadn't been able to get pregnant for 7 years, had 2 miscarriages. And then he appeared, her golden boy. I never told Paige about this, about the real relationship in our family. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A successful lawyer father, an elegant housewife mother, 2 children, generous gifts for the holidays, vacations on the coast, family dinners every Sunday. And then I came along, I continued with a bitter smile. Unplanned. My mom once let it slip when she was arguing with my dad. I would have stopped at one, but you insisted on a second child. I don't think she ever really recovered from having to share her love. Lizzie, Paige began, but I shook my head. It's an old story. For Christmas, when Garrett was 12, my mom gave him a brand new bike. I got a book about the adventures of a girl detective. Garrett got a leather jacket, and I got a knitted sweater. Garrett, the first one in our town, got an Atari with a bunch of games, and I got an embroidery kit, and so on and so forth. It's unfair, Paige said carefully. Dad tried to compensate. He was the only one who came to my choir performances. He would make up special adventure days for him and me. We'd go to a neighboring town, visit a museum or zoo, eat ice cream. My mom would stay with Garrett, saying she had a migraine or plans with her friends. And Garrett saw this difference. He saw that my mom belonged to him, and my dad loved me more. It created a split between us, between my parents. I fell silent, remembering my parents' quiet quarrels when they thought we were asleep. You spoil him too much. You only pay attention to Lizzie. 2 halves of a family, 2 camps that had never met. When Garrett became a teenager, things got worse. I put down the half-eaten cookies. He started hanging out with dysfunctional boys, skipping school. His first theft occurred when he was 14. He took an expensive speedometer off a neighbor's bike. His mother said, "Boys have to go through these things, it's normal." Dad tried to set rules, but how? Mom always undermined his authority. Paige listened in silence. I felt embarrassed. I was talking about my family as if I hated them. But it wasn't true. I loved them all, Mom, Dad, even Garrett. It was just that our love was always damaged. When I was 16, Garrett got into the police station for the first time. I continued more quietly. A fight in a bar, even though he wasn't allowed to go there yet. My dad went to pick him up, and I heard them arguing in the parking lot when they got back. "You're ruining your life!" Dad yelled like he had never yelled before. Garrett just laughed in his face. "How could you care? You have your favorite," I stuttered, looking at the bruises. How many times had Garrett and I fought over these accusations? Daddy's little girl, teacher's favorite, little Miss Perfect, as if my successes somehow diminished his, as if we could not have separate lives, separate achievements. Our paths finally parted when I went to college, I said. By then, Garrett had already dropped out of 2 different universities, alcohol, fights, truancy. My mom was still making excuses for him. He just hasn't found his way yet. Dad paid for his apartment, gave him money, but they had nothing in common anymore. I remembered living in a dormitory, proudly telling my neighbors that my father was a famous lawyer, never mentioning that my brother worked as a bartender and had crashed my mother's car 3 times. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, everything else faded into the background. I pushed the tray away and stood up. Stage 4, metastatic. She lived only 8 months after the diagnosis. I went to the window. The morning sun was shining on our garden, which Dad had carefully tended for years. Mom rarely went out there, allergic to pollen, she said. Garrett visited her infrequently. My voice sounded hollow. He said he couldn't bear to see her like this. I took a sabbatical, came home. Dad was broken. 32 years of marriage, despite all their difficulties. Paige came over and stood next to me. Dad never talked about it, I continued, but something changed in him after she died. Some bitterness disappeared. It was as if he and my mom had been at war for so long that he had forgotten how to live in peace. I paused, collecting my thoughts. When I graduated, I was offered a job in the capital, a good position, a good salary. But my dad, his heart was weakening. He was alone. I turned down the offer and found a position as an administrator at a local clinic. By then, Garrett was already working for a construction company and married a girl named Tessa. They divorced a year later. He moved into an apartment 20 minutes away, but he visited his father, rarely. And when he did? Paige asked quietly. He usually needed money, I replied, remembering Garrett sitting at this very kitchen table, telling my dad about the next perfect opportunity that required a small loan, or help with the next mess. Fines, alimony, debts. I stopped talking. Maybe I was being too harsh. Garrett sometimes came over for dinner, watched sports with his father, but he never stayed longer than an hour or two. He never offered to help. A year before he died, Dad changed his will. I looked at Paige. One night, while we were watching an old movie in the living room, he just said, "I'm going to leave the house to you, Lizzie." I was shocked and started to object. This is a family home. Garrett is the eldest. But my dad was adamant. Your brother doesn't value family. He will sell the house at the first opportunity to cover debts or buy another car. This place needs to stay in the hands of someone who will take care of it. Paige nodded, as if everything had fallen into place. I tried to convince him to divide everything equally, I added, but he said that Garrett would get a watch collection that could be sold for a decent amount of money and some cash. The house is your roots, Lizzie. It's your heritage. I don't want to see it torn away. Tears began to gather in the corners of my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away. You deserve this house, Paige said softly. You were there for me when I needed you. I didn't answer. Did I deserve it? I was just doing what I thought was right. I took care of my father, gave up my career not to get an inheritance, but because he was my dad, the only person who had always supported me. You know what's worse? I asked, returning to bed. Dad never told Garrett about the changes. He didn't want to fight. He put off the difficult conversation. And then, he didn't have time. I remembered the morning in the office of attorney Jeremy Foster, a gray-haired man with kind eyes. The quiet, restrained room. The smell of wood and paper. Garrett was 15 minutes late without apologizing. I'll never forget the look on his face, I whispered. First shock then. Pure rage. He stood up and overturned his chair. This is impossible. He couldn't have done this. This is a family home. It was supposed to go to me. I remembered how the lawyer had calmly explained that the will had been drawn up properly, with 2 witnesses, when my father was in his right mind. Garrett accused me of manipulating my father. My voice trembled with the memory, yelling that I had always been the favorite, that I had been waiting for this moment. I tried to explain that I was trying to convince Dad to split everything equally, but Garrett wouldn't listen. Paige took my hand, careful not to touch the bruises. He ran out of the office, slamming the door so hard that the paintings on the wall shook. I finished quietly. But before he did, he looked back and said, "You're going to regret this, Lizzie. I swear, you're going to regret this bitterly." The first court document came a week after the attack. It was an official stamped envelope announcing the contestation of Richard Morton's will on the grounds of testator's incapacity and undue influence by an interested party. Translated from legalese, Garrett claimed that our father was not in his right mind and that I was manipulating him. I sat in the kitchen reading this document over and over again until the letters started to blur. How could he? How could Garrett say such a thing? Dad was in his right mind until the very end. He could forget where he put his glasses, but he always remembered all his relatives' birthdays, discussed politics, and planned gardening. Good morning, Ms. Morton. An unfamiliar female voice sounded confident and calm. My name is Vanessa Clark. I represent the law firm Foster and Partners. Mr. Foster has asked me to take your case. My case? The appeal of your father's will. We received a copy of your brother's lawsuit this morning. I thought we'd better meet in person. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the cozy office of Vanessa Clark, a woman in her 40s with a short haircut and penetrating eyes. Unlike Jeremy Foster, who had managed my father's affairs for years and had an office filled with antiques, her space was minimalist and modern. Here's what's going on. Vanessa spread the documents on the table. Your brother claims that your father was unable to make informed decisions about his estate due to his deteriorating health, and that you, knowing his vulnerable condition, encouraged him to change his will in your favor. That's a lie, I said, and Vanessa nodded. But we'll have to prove it. Mr. Foster gave me your father's medical records for the last year. Luckily, the will was changed 8 months before the first records of heart attacks. Plus, we have 2 witnesses testifying to his mental capacity. So this is good news? Yes, but we're going to have to face some serious charges. Your brother hired Martin Shelby, a man known for his aggressive methods. I sighed, remembering Garrett looming over me. Sign it, or I'll break every bone in your body. Should I have mentioned, what happened a week ago? What threats? Her gaze became sharper. Garrett came to the house demanding that I sign a disclaimer. When I refused, he pushed me, threatened me with physical harm. Vanessa took out her phone and took several photos of my hand. Did you report it to the police? I shook my head. It's my brother. I didn't want to. Lizzie, she emphasized my name. You have to understand that this is no longer a family dispute. This is a legal battle, and your brother's behavior is direct proof that he is willing to break the law to get what he wants. I realized she was right, but the thought of filing a formal complaint against Garrett still made me feel like a traitor. I'll think about it, I finally said. Good, Vanessa made a note. One more thing. Prepare for a long fight. These cases can drag on for months. Months? I didn't hide my disappointment. But I think our position is strong. Just be careful. People in these situations sometimes resort to unpleasant methods. I didn't know how prophetic her words would turn out to be. The first rumors reached me a week later. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called me just to talk. But there was an unusual tension in her voice. Lizzie, honey, I just want to understand, is it true that you've been refusing to let Garrett visit his father for the past few months? What? Of course not. I was shocked. Who told you that? Oh, well, Garrett mentioned that you were controlling who could see Richard. Something about how you wanted to influence his decisions. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Aunt Carol, that's a complete lie. Dad was at home, not in the hospital. Garrett was free to come over whenever he wanted. He just didn't come. Of course, honey, I'm just asking. Her tone became even more distant. You know how people talk. The next day, I noticed some dirty looks in the supermarket. Mrs. Jenkins, a neighbor who had known our family for 20 years, walked by without even saying hello. My heart clenched. Garrett was spreading rumors, and people believed him. When I got home, I found a message on my answering machine from my cousin Alex. Lizzie, is it true about the will? Garrett says you made Uncle Richard sign it over to you. Call me. I sat down on the stairs, feeling anger and powerlessness fill me. Garrett wasn't just challenging the will. He was turning me into a thief in the eyes of the whole family. But that was only the beginning. One morning, I came out of the house and saw that all 4 tires of my car were slashed. There was a note on the rearview mirror. Give up the house. I immediately called the police, but the officer just shrugged his shoulders. Without surveillance cameras and witnesses, we can't prove who did this. It's my brother. I showed the note. We're suing over an inheritance. The officer, a young man with tired eyes, wrote down the details. We can file a complaint, but if you don't have direct evidence against your brother. I just have to fix the tires and wait for the next time? I asked, irritated. You can install cameras, he suggested, closing his notebook, and document any threats. I was 2 hours late for work. Samantha Gill, the clinic's chief administrator and my immediate supervisor, greeted me with concern. Oh my God, Lizzie, what happened? I briefly explained the situation. It's terrible, Samantha shook my hand. Look, if you need a few days to sort things out. No, I interrupted her. Work is the only place I can get away from this nightmare. But even the clinic was no longer a safe haven the following week. I was sitting at the front desk when I saw Garrett walking confidently through the lobby. Hey, sis! His smile was icy. I thought we'd talk on neutral ground. Garrett, I'm at work. I tried to speak calmly, although my hands were already shaking. Please go. Still playing the victim? He leaned over the counter. Poor little Lizzie, who just wanted to take care of Daddy. But in reality, she had it all planned out to take the house that belongs to me. Mister, if you're not a patient, you'll have to leave the room. Samantha suddenly stood next to him, tall and confident. You're interfering with the work of our staff. Oh, I won't be long. Garrett stepped back, but gave me a look that made me feel cold inside. After he left, I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Thank you, I whispered to Samantha. You're welcome, she replied. I'll call security so they know his face. But despite all the precautions, Garrett returned twice more the next week. One day, he made a scene in the waiting room, loudly telling an elderly patient that his sister was stealing the family fortune. Another time, he waited in the parking lot as I was finishing my shift and chased me all the way home, shouting insults from the car window. The nightmare continued at home. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night. One morning, I found a broken window in the living room. Another morning, I found a dead bird on the porch. Vanessa insisted on a restraining order, but I was still hesitant. Part of me didn't believe my brother was capable of such a thing, looking for other explanations. In late October, a preliminary hearing was held. Garrett was sitting on the other side of the courtroom, not looking in my direction. His lawyer, Martin Shelby, a thin man with a shark's smile, presented the testimony of a former neighbor who claimed that my father often seemed distracted. Vanessa quickly refuted this, presenting the opinion of her father's doctor and the testimony of two of his colleagues who had seen him the week before the will was changed. We have the first round, she said as we left the room, but Shelby is just warming up. Outside, Garrett crossed my path. Enjoy the moment, he said. When the truth comes out, everyone will see the real you. Garrett, please. I tried one last time. We could have worked out a compromise. Compromise? He laughed, but there was no joy in his eyes. You see, Lizzie, you've always gotten everything you wanted. Daddy's attention, his praise, his opportunities. This time it would be different. I looked after him, feeling not anger, but rather deep sadness. Did he really see me like that throughout our childhood, as some kind of privileged princess, my father's favorite? In my memories, everything was different. I was always trying to earn approval, especially my mother's, which I rarely received. Thanksgiving that year fell on a cold, windy day. I almost didn't want to go to Aunt Carol's traditional dinner, but the prospect of spending the holiday alone in an empty house seemed even worse. Paige had invited me to join her family, but I declined. I didn't want to be a burden. My aunt's house was filled with the aromas of roast turkey and pumpkin pie. When I walked in, the conversation stopped, an awkward pause that told me they were talking about me. I noticed strained smiles, overzealous greetings. Lizzie, dear! Aunt Carol hugged me, but in a distant way. 15 relatives gathered around the table. Uncles, aunts, cousins. Garrett wasn't here yet, so I allowed myself to relax a little. Maybe he decided not to come. But at 5, the doorbell rang to announce his arrival. Even from across the room, I could see that he was already drunk, flushed, and with sparkling eyes. He greeted everyone loudly, defiantly ignoring me. Dinner began with the traditional circle of Thanksgiving. Everyone had to say what they were thankful for this year. When it was Garrett's turn, he raised his glass. I'm thankful for the justice that will surely come, he said, looking directly at me, and for a family that sees the truth even through the lies. A wave of awkwardness passed around the table. Uncle Paul cleared his throat and quickly changed the subject. During the main course, the tension eased a bit. I was talking to my cousin Laura about her new job when Garrett, who had already had his third glass of wine, suddenly raised his voice. Do you know what's most interesting about our family drama? He looked around the table. Garrett, Aunt Carol warned quietly, today is Family Day. And isn't that what I'm talking about? He smiled broadly. How one person can pretend to care, but in reality, they're just waiting for the moment to take over. I felt the blood rush to my face. That's enough, I said quietly but firmly. If you want to discuss the case, do it through the lawyers. Oh, of course! He threw up his hands theatrically. Lawyers! Just what Dad would have wanted, for his children to fight through the courts. Do you know when it all started? What are you talking about? I couldn't take it anymore. The way you manipulated him for years. Garrett leaned forward. How you pretended to be the perfect daughter, gave up your career to take care of him. But in reality, you were just waiting for him to rewrite everything for you. You don't know what you're talking about. He slammed his fist on the table, making everyone shudder. I know that my mom wanted me to have the house. I know it was her will. But you brainwashed Dad, made him forget what she wanted. Richard had the right to dispose of his property as he saw fit, Laura, my cousin, suddenly said. And let's be honest, Garrett, you've barely spoken to your father in years. Garrett looked over at her, his eyes narrowing. Oh, another defender. You're all so naive. You think she took care of him out of love? He turned to me again. Tell them, Lizzie. Tell them how you waited for Daddy to die so you could finally get your prize. It was too much. Don't you dare say that. My voice was quiet, but every word cut like a blade. You weren't there when he couldn't sleep in pain. You didn't hold his hand during every test, every procedure. You were not the one who saw him getting weaker every day. You came only when you needed money. And now that's all you care about. The money you can get for the house. Bullshit! Garrett jumped up, knocking over his glass. The red wine spilled over the white tablecloth like blood. This is my house! Garrett, please. Aunt Carol tried to intervene, but he didn't hear her. You're a thief, Lizzie. You always have been. You stole Daddy's love, and now you're stealing my birthright. I looked around for support, but all I could see were downcast eyes and uncomfortable postures. No one wanted to intervene, except Laura, who was standing next to me. I'm sorry, I said quietly, picking up my bag. I'd better go. Yes, run! Garrett shouted after me. I stepped out into the cold air, feeling tears rolling down my cheeks. Laura came after me. Don't listen to him, she said, hugging me. He's drunk and angry. They all believe him, I whispered. I can see it in their eyes. Not all of them, Laura shook her head. This is a family. I got into the car, feeling bitter and lonely. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday, the warmth, the laughter, the sense of belonging. Now all of that had been destroyed, like so much else in my life. At home, just as I closed the door, my phone beeped with a new message. It was from Garrett. The house was supposed to be mine. I will get it, even if I have to destroy your life. Waking up to my own screaming had become almost a habit for me. My heart was pounding, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were shaking. I turned on the light and looked around the room. No one was there. Just another nightmare. In this one, Garrett tried to set the house on fire while I was sleeping. In another, he was standing over my bed with a knife. The reality was not much better. The clock read 3 in the morning. Another sleepless night. I couldn't remember the last time I slept for more than 3 hours straight. A week after the terrible Thanksgiving, Aunt Carol began having panic attacks. The first one happened in the supermarket when I was just shopping for groceries. Suddenly, I felt like someone was watching me. My heart was racing. The air was thick as water. I dropped the basket and ran out to the parking lot, where I almost fainted, leaning on my car. I got out of bed and went to the window. It was dark and quiet outside. The neighboring houses were asleep. There was nothing suspicious. But I knew I wouldn't sleep again. Every creak of the old house, every sound from the street made me shudder. I no longer felt safe in my own home. My phone lit up with a new message. I flinched. Garrett again? But it was Paige. Are you awake? For some reason, neither am I. Do you want to talk? My best friend could sense my state, even from a distance. I called her. Unbelievable. Her voice sounded sleepy but warm. I just woke up and thought about you. I'm sorry to wake you up. It's nothing. Did you have another nightmare? I sighed. Yeah. Garrett with the matches this time. Lizzie, her voice turned serious. That's enough. You need to move, at least temporarily. Where? Get an apartment? I glanced at the window I'd taped over after finding it broken last week. The trial is eating up all my savings. To my place, of course. My guest room is free. I can't ask. You're not asking, I'm offering, she interrupted. Pack your things. I'll pick you up tomorrow after work. I opened my mouth to object, but suddenly realized how tired I was of fighting alone. How exhausted I was from constant fear and insomnia. I gave up. Okay. Thank you. The next day, I called Vanessa to tell her I was moving. Good decision, she said. But before you leave, install security cameras. If your brother tries to break in your absence, it will be evidence against him. That same day, the technicians installed simple cameras at all entrances and in the main rooms. I was unhappy to see my home, a place of fond memories, turn into a fortress. Samantha approved of my temporary move. Honestly, you've been looking terrible these past weeks, she said, when I told her the new emergency address. Maybe you should take a vacation. I can't. I shook my head. I need money for lawyers. Then at least get some sleep. And be careful with the documents. I made another mistake yesterday. I felt my face flush with shame. Last week, I mixed up the test results of 2 patients, and it was only thanks to the lab assistant's care that I managed to avoid serious consequences. And yesterday, I forgot to enter important information about an allergy in a patient's chart. I'm sorry, I understand, Samantha said gently. But this is an official warning, Lizzie. One more mistake, and I'll have to suspend you. I nodded, feeling the tears coming to my eyes. Samantha had been fair, but it didn't make it any easier. It seemed like Garrett was methodically destroying my entire life. My reputation, my security, my job. That evening, while packing up my essentials, I found an old photo of my father in his desk drawer. It showed him, young and smiling, standing outside our house when we first bought it. I held the picture to my chest and finally burst into tears, deep, painful sobs that came from my heart. Dad, I whispered to the empty room, what am I going to do? I can't take it anymore. At Paige's house, I slept for 12 hours straight, no nightmares, no panicked awakenings. For the first time in months, I felt safe. You're looking a little better, Paige said at breakfast. How about a visit to the doctor? Why? I shrugged. He'll say I'm stressed. I don't mean a therapist. Although, to be honest, a psychologist wouldn't hurt either. I looked down at my shaking hands. Maybe Paige was right. I couldn't go on living like this, exhausted, scared, on the verge of a breakdown. Something had to change. Vanessa recommended a therapist, Rebecca Foster, who specialized in trauma and family conflict. At the first session, I felt awkward, not knowing where to start. With my childhood? With my dad's death? With Garrett's aggression? Start with what's bothering you now, suggested Dr. Foster, a middle-aged woman with attentive eyes and a calm voice. I don't know who I am anymore. The words came out suddenly. Now I'm just a victim. A man who is afraid of his own shadow. Rebecca nodded. Strong shocks often make us lose our sense of self. but it's only temporary. I didn't believe her then, but I kept walking. Every week, taking apart layer by layer my fears, anger, guilt. We talked about my childhood, about my difficult relationship with my mother, about her clear preference for Garrett. It's a very common pattern, Rebecca explained. One parent chooses the golden child, and the other compensates by paying more attention to the other. But it creates an unhealthy dynamic that affects the rest of their lives. Seer, so I should forgive Garrett for his hatred? I asked bitterly. He's trying to destroy me. No, she replied firmly. Understanding the origin of the problem does not mean justifying the behavior. On the contrary, it gives you the power to set healthy boundaries. Boundaries. This word became my lighthouse. On the advice of Rebecca and Vanessa, I finally filed for a restraining order against Garrett. The judge, after hearing the story of threats, vandalism, and harassment, granted my request. Now Garrett was not allowed to come within 100 meters of me, my home, or my place of work. I also blocked his number, unfriended him on social media, and asked the clinic security guard not to let him in. Setting these boundaries was painful, as if I had finally cut off a part of my life, my past. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was back in control of my own life. There were changes at work, too. The clinic hired a new doctor, Dr. Ethan Gale, a family medicine specialist. He was tall, with a friendly smile and a caring attitude towards patients, and quickly became a favorite of the team. I noticed that he often stopped by my desk to check the schedule, or just to have a quick word. How long have you been working here? He asked one day when we were alone after the clinic closed. Almost 6 years, I replied, sorting through the cards. And how do you like it? I usually do, I met his eyes. It's a difficult time right now. Something in his eyes made me continue. Family problems. If you ever want to talk, he said softly, I'm a good listener, and I can offer you coffee, which is much better than the one in the break room. I found myself smiling for the first time in a long time. Thank you, Dr. Gale. Ethan, he corrected. My father is Dr. Gale. A week later, we had that promised coffee. The conversation flowed easily about work, about his move from another state, about the books we both loved. Not a word about my problems. It was normal, like a breath of fresh air after a long stay in a stuffy room. It wasn't until our third meeting, when we were walking in the park after dinner, that I decided to bring up the situation with Garrett. I expected Ethan to pull away when he heard about the drama, but he just took my hand and listened intently. This is very hard, he said when I finished, but you are incredibly strong, Lizzie. I see it every day. Strong? I smiled bitterly. I'm afraid to go back to my own house. And yet you keep fighting. You don't give up. There was something genuine in his words, something that made me believe that maybe I was really stronger than I thought. Gradually, our meetings became more regular, and our conversations deepened. I found out that Ethan had gotten divorced 2 years ago, that he loved old jazz records, and was a bad cook for everything but omelets. He learned about my childhood, my love of books, how I dreamed of becoming a nurse but put off studying to care for my father. It's never too late to go back to your dreams, he said one evening as we sat on his terrace, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. If it's really important to you. Maybe, I replied, thinking of how my father had always supported my educational plans. After this is over. Ethan took my hand gently. It will be over, Lizzie. And something new will begin. In that moment, I almost believed him. 2 weeks before the final probate hearing, security cameras caught Garrett trying to break into my house through the back door late at night. He was obviously drunk, fumbled with the lock for a long time, then smashed the kitchen window. The security system went off, and the police arrested him on the spot. When Vanessa called me with the news, I felt a mixture of relief and regret. This is a serious violation of the restraining order, she explained. What will happen to him depends on many factors, but probably a fine and probation. I nodded. even though she couldn't see it. I didn't know what to feel. My brother, with whom I used to collect fireflies in jars, was now detained for trying to break into a house. Was our family completely destroyed? The final hearing of the case took place on a cold December day. Garrett looked tired and aged. The probation he had received for the break-in had obviously taken its toll on him. He barely glanced in my direction as he entered the room. Vanessa was confident, collected, and unwavering. She methodically refuted every accusation made by Garrett's lawyer, presented medical evidence of her father's capacity, and testimony from his colleagues and friends who had regular contact with him until his death. My client not only did not manipulate her father, she concluded, but also tried to convince him to divide the estate more equitably. Richard Morton had clear reasons for his decisions, and these reasons were unfortunately confirmed by the plaintiff's subsequent behavior. The court's decision was unanimous. The will was recognized as valid, and all claims of incapacity or undue influence were rejected. The house officially belonged to me. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt only fatigue and emptiness. As I left the courtroom, I tried to make eye contact with Garrett, but he quickly passed me by as if I were invisible. "Congratulations!" Vanessa shook my hand. It was a tough battle, but justice was served. Justice. What a bitter victory when the price is your family. At home, now officially mine, I sat in my father's study, looking at his collection of books, his antique globe, the photographs on the walls. This house was filled with memories good and bad. It was here that I rode a bicycle for the first time. This is where my mom cried when she learned about her diagnosis. This is where Garrett pushed me to the floor, demanding that I sign a waiver of inheritance. I picked up the phone and called Ethan. "We won," I said tiredly. "The house is mine." "I'm happy for you," he replied softly. When he arrived, we just sat in silence, holding hands. Then I led him through the rooms, telling him the stories associated with each one. This is where my dad taught me to play chess. This is where my mom and I baked cookies for Christmas. This is where Garrett built a blanket fort when I was 6. I thought that when it was over, I would feel better, I said when we returned to the living room. It just feels like a place of pain and loss. Ethan looked at me closely. "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, voicing for the first time a thought that had been forming for weeks. I want to sell it. Start from scratch, somewhere where there are no ghosts of the past. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "Yes." I felt an invisible weight lift off my shoulders. This house was my dad's legacy, but my legacy is what he taught me. Honesty, kindness, the ability to move forward. Not the walls and the roof. I want to start a new life, and maybe go back to an old dream. About nursing? I nodded, feeling something like hope for the first time. I'll use part of the money from the sale to pay for my studies. And part of it for a new start. An apartment that will be mine, without the past. Ethan put his arms around me, and I felt safe in his arms, not the desperate safety of a shelter, but a calm confidence in the future. "I'm with you, whatever you decide," he whispered. That night, as I lay in bed, I imagined putting the house on the market, packing my things, closing the door for the last time. Instead of pain and fear, I felt a strange relief. Dad wanted this house to be my refuge, but it became a prison. Letting it go is probably the best way to honor my father's memory. To start living the way he wanted me to live, freely, confidently, with hope for the future. I once heard a saying that a year is enough time to change a whole life. A year ago, I stood on the threshold of my parents' house, with the keys in my shaking hands, unable to believe that I would never cross that threshold as a hostess again. A year ago, I was broken, scared, unsure of my future. And today, I was sitting at the table in my small but cozy apartment, surrounded by textbooks and notes. On the fridge hung my medical school schedule, 3 semesters, and I would become a registered nurse. The dream I had put off for my father was finally coming true. Studying turned out to be more difficult than I expected, especially after so many years off. But every time I successfully passed an exam or mastered a new skill, I was overwhelmed with pride. Dad would have been happy. The sale of the house went surprisingly quickly. A young family with 2 children fell in love with it at first sight. I loved the thought of hearing children's laughter again. I kept only the most valuable things: my dad's books, family photos, and a few pieces of furniture. The rest I either sold or gave to charitable organizations. Every box I packed, every room I emptied was a step towards liberation. I distributed the money from the sale wisely, part of it for my studies, part for an apartment, and the rest for reliable investments. For the first time in my life, I felt financially independent and confident. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Ethan walked in, holding a bag of Chinese food and a bouquet of wildflowers. "How was the exam?" he asked, kissing me. "I think I passed," I smiled, taking the flowers. "Anatomy is harder than I expected." "That's because you're too smart." He started pulling out the food containers. "Your brain is looking for complexity where there isn't any." I laughed. Ethan always knew how to cheer me up. Over the course of this year, our relationship developed from a cautious friendship to a deep, stable feeling I had never experienced before. He was there when I signed the documents to sell my house, helped me move, and supported my decision to change careers. And most importantly, he never pressured me, giving me time to heal my wounds. "By the way," he said as we sat down at the table, "did you get an invitation to Laura's wedding?" Laura, my cousin, who was the only one who took my side during the Thanksgiving scandal, got engaged a few months ago. "Yeah," I nodded. "I'm thinking of going." She was there for me when I was going through a rough patch. "Will the whole family be there?" Ethan asked cautiously. I knew what he meant. After I sold the house and started a new life, some relatives gradually reconnected. Aunt Carol called to wish me a Merry Christmas. Uncle Paul invited me to a barbecue in the summer. In small steps, uncertainly, but family ties were slowly being restored. "I don't know if he will," I answered quietly. "We haven't talked since then, since the court finally recognized the will as valid. Since I sold the house he thought was his. Some relatives said that Garrett had moved to another city, others that he had fallen deeper into alcohol. I tried not to think about him, focusing on my own healing. If it gets uncomfortable, we can always leave." Ethan shook my hand. I nodded, grateful for his support. A year of therapy with Dr. Foster had taught me how to set healthy boundaries, but the thought of seeing Garrett still made me anxious. The next morning, as I was getting ready for class, the phone rang. It was Aunt Carol's number. I was surprised. She usually called on weekends. "Lizzie, honey," she sounded tense. "I'm sorry to bother you so early." "Is something wrong?" A pause. Then, "It's Garrett. He's at the hospital." My heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "An accident." Her voice trembled. He was driving drunk. He hit a tree at a high rate of speed. Doctors say there are fractures, internal injuries, and his liver. Years of alcohol had taken its toll. I sat down, feeling my legs weakening. Is he going to live?" "Yes, but it's going to be a long recovery." "Lizzie, I don't know how to say this. No one in the family wants to deal with him. He's been difficult lately." "Agnes and his wife?" "Garrett remarried 6 months ago. I heard from relatives." "Gina filed for divorce last month," my aunt answered quietly. Silence fell. I knew where she was going with this. "Aunt Carol, I'm not asking you to stay with him after everything he's done," she said quickly. I sat still for a long time after the call. Images flashed before my eyes. Little Garrett teaching me how to throw rocks in the water. Teenage Garrett roughly pushing me away. Adult Garrett hovering over me with threats. And finally, Garrett in a hospital bed, alone and broken. I remembered Dr. Foster's words. Forgiveness is not about justifying the offender. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of anger. Was I ready for this step? Instead of going to class, I went to Ethan's office. He listened to me carefully, without interrupting. "How do you feel?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me feels gloating. Now he got what he deserved. The other part of me just misses the brother I once knew." "And what do you want to do?" "I think I should visit him." The words came out before I realized it. For me. To finish this chapter, Ethan nodded. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No." I shook my head. "This is something I have to do on my own." The city hospital greeted me with the smell of antiseptics and muffled voices. For a moment, I was afraid. What will I say? How will I react if he starts accusing me again? But I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Foster's calming techniques. I am no longer the scared woman I was a year ago. I am stronger, more confident, ready to set boundaries. Garrett was lying alone in the room. His face was pale, his tubes were connected, and his leg was in a cast. He looked much older than his 39 years. Wrinkles on his face, gray hair, yellowish skin tone from liver problems. He didn't notice me right away. I watched him stare out the window with an expression of deep fatigue and sadness. When the door creaked open, he turned his head and froze when he saw me. "Hi, Garrett," I said quietly. He stared at me for a few seconds, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "Lizzie." His voice was hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "Aunt Carol called. She told me about the accident." "Did you come to enjoy the view?" The bitterness in his voice was familiar, but it seemed to lack the anger of before. I came closer, sat down on the chair next to the bed. "No, I came to see how you are." He turned away, but not before I noticed something in his eyes. Surprise? "Are you seriously injured?" I asked, looking at the monitor. "Broke my leg in 3 places," he grunted. 2 broken ribs, internal bleeding, but they stopped it. "I'm sorry, don't act like you care," he suddenly snapped, but his words lacked the same force. "After everything I've done." "I do care," I interrupted him. "You're my brother, Garrett." "No matter what." He looked at me, a long, appraising look. "Why did you really come, Lizzie?" I decided to be honest. "I don't know. Maybe to understand why we had become such strangers. Maybe to try to let go of the past." He was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I hated you, you know. Not for the house. Much earlier. And I envied you," I replied simply, "because Mom always chose you." We sat in silence, letting those words, perhaps the most honest we'd ever exchanged, hang between us. "Dad was right," Garrett suddenly said, looking down at his hands. "About me. I've spent my whole life looking for the easy way out. I've always blamed others for my problems. I didn't know what to say. I never expected such a confession from him." "What will happen when you are discharged?" I asked instead. He smiled bitterly. "I don't know. Gina's gone. I probably lost my job. I'll be able to pay the rent for maybe a month." I nodded, thinking about the situation. Then I made a decision that may have been reckless, but it seemed right. I can help. With rehabilitation, with finding a new job. But on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You are seriously taking control of your life. Treatment for alcoholism, therapy, no shortcuts." Garrett looked at me for a long time, as if assessing the seriousness of the proposal. "Why are you doing this?" "Because life is too short for hate," I answered, remembering my mother's last days, my father's sudden death, and because maybe we both deserve a second chance. I can't promise that everything will be the same, but we can try something new. "I'll try," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can, but I'll try." This was not reconciliation, not the forgiveness of all sins. It was a small, tentative step on a long journey that could lead us to healing or nowhere. But it was a beginning. When I returned home, Ethan was waiting with a hot dinner and a willingness to listen. I told him everything. Are you sure about helping him? He asked cautiously. No, I answered honestly, but I have to try. Otherwise, I will always think, what if? He hugged me. I'm with you, whatever you decide. Outside the window, snow began to fall, the first of the year. I remembered when I was a kid, building snowmen in the backyard with Garrett, my mom making hot chocolate, and my dad taking pictures of our creations. We were a family back then, with all our flaws and complexities. Perhaps, somehow, we could try to be that family again, different, older, but still a family. 2 weeks later, when Garrett was discharged, I helped him find a small rehabilitation center that accepted patients on a sliding fee scale. We talked briefly, uncomfortably, but without the old hostility. It was far from intimate, but it was a start. Meanwhile, my own life continued to change. Ethan proposed to me, simply, without drama, over breakfast on a typical Saturday. I said yes, with a confidence that I hadn't felt during my first engagement years before. One sunny spring day, Ethan and I visited a local building center. He had recently bought an old house on the outskirts of town, small, cozy, with a garden that needed a lot of work and love. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked, as we looked at flooring samples. Absolutely, he smiled. The house has history and character. All it needs is a little care to bring out its potential. I thought about how much had changed in a year, how I had lost one home and was now preparing to create a new one, how the family ties that seemed hopelessly broken were slowly, painfully, but restored. Do you know what I've realized this year? I said, as we moved on to the paint department. That home is not walls and a roof. It's the people who really love and support you, even if they're not related to you by blood. Ethan put his arm around me. That's why I want to create a home with you. Not just a building, but a place where we both feel safe, loved, accepted. I nodded, leaning against him. Sometimes you have to lose something valuable to find what's really important. We chose a warm shade of yellow for the kitchen, the color of the sun and new beginnings. I imagined sitting there over coffee, maybe discussing complicated cases from the hospital. If all goes according to plan, I'll be a full-time nurse in a year. How Ethan will cook his signature omelet. How perhaps our children will laugh there one day. And then I imagined another scene. Unusual, uncertain, but possible. Garrett coming home for dinner. Sober. Calm. Trying to reacquaint himself with his sister, as she has become now. Maybe he will never become a close person in my life. Maybe the wounds are too deep. But the very possibility that we could try to build something new instead of the destroyed old gave me hope. My dad always said that true strength is not in never falling, but in finding the courage to get up again and again. This also applied to family ties. They can break, stretch to the limit, but there is always a chance, if not to bring back the past, then to build something new. Different, but perhaps no less valuable. Now, standing in the middle of the construction center, I felt strangely calm. The past year has brought more pain and loss than I could have imagined, but also more growth and opportunity. I lost my home, but I found a real home. I lost the old version of myself, but I found a new one. Stronger, wiser, more whole. I chose a sample of wood for the floor, a warm, honey-colored shade that reminded me of the shelves in my dad's office. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer determined my future. Now it was my decision, my path. And for the first time in a long time, I was sure that I was going in the right direction.